Hi, today I'm going to be discussing Chapter 3. My focus for my reflection is going to be on identity. During the reading, my beliefs were challenged when Woolfolk discussed how children compare themselves to what they can do now to what they previously could do. The example she gives is when students ask questions like, "How am I doing?" This is something I'm asked almost every day in my 4th grade classroom. And up until reading the book, I always assumed the child was either checking to make sure their answer was correct so that their grade could be good, or that they were maybe looking at their peers who had already finished the assignment and were wondering, ooh, how am I doing? They're finished and I'm only on question 2. In reality, the child is checking in with themselves and forming how am I doing to ultimately form their identity. Something that surprised me was when Woolfolk discussed how you're the same individual, even if aspects of your life have changed. It makes a lot of sense to me after reading it. But prior to reading it, I thought that some of the people I know who changed big aspects of their life or beliefs in their lives are one person and now they feel like another. In reality, that same unique individual person is still inside. It's important for me to keep this in mind as a teacher, because some of my students may be going through big changes in their life, maybe a divorce or a loss of a loved one, where they behave differently because of something that's happened in their life. But it's important for me to keep in mind that that individual inside is still the same person. Something that made me reconsider my previous belief was the discussion of the self-esteem movement and some of the problems it's facing. The chapter discussed how schools and programs are giving out praise to children to help build self-esteem. Woolfolk discusses how programs to help build self-esteem are about one sense of self and working harder against the odds. These programs are putting everybody in the same category and giving them the same or similar praise, when in reality people come from all walks of life and need different things to build their self-esteem. The book goes on to suggest that self-esteem should be changed to self-appraisal and then ultimately to self-control. This makes sense because I feel that it is meeting people at their individual level instead of lumping everyone into one category and telling them to work hard and beat the odds. It's helping people ultimately be able to recognize who they are in building their self-esteem and have a concept of themselves. Something that affirmed my previous beliefs was a discussion about tethered children. These tethered children are able to quickly communicate with their families because of cell phones. They have parents who are able to respond and help out and solve their problems very easily and very quickly for them. I connected this to the different parenting styles that we read about earlier in the chapter, because some parents want to solve problems for these kids, for their own kids. Parents who may consider themselves authoritative or permissive often have the lines blurred between guidance and solving problems for their child. The chapter discusses how permissive parents often make excuses for their students, for their children, and why their behavior is one way. This can lead to becoming a helicopter parent because these parents are wanting their child to be warm and secure and comfortable all the time, so the parents are solving the problems for their kids instead of the children solving them on their own. This is something that I have seen in my classroom, where because children are tethered to their phones, they can text their parents at the end of the day or at some point and let their parent know of something that happened at school, and then the parents come in and try and solve the problem for the child. Obviously, in 4th grade, when there's a big problem, it's really important for the parent and the teacher to have open communication. There are some problems that are too big for the children to solve, but a lot of times I've had parents who have received calls or texts from their students, and they come into me and solve problems about an eraser being missing or a pencil that somebody borrowed that wasn't given back. This is stopping the children from being able to solve the problems on their own, or at least attempt to solve the problems on their own first. This connects to identity because parenting styles influence how a child is raised and ultimately who that child is. Culture and parenting styles are linked. The chapter discusses how Asian and Latino families do not feel that they can fit any of the 4 parenting styles. These family structures influence how a child is raised and ultimately who the child will become. For example, children raised in an authoritarian household may have a more difficult time with exploration in their adolescence because the rules in their house are so strict that it is difficult for them to be able to push the boundaries, expand, explore, and find out new things about themselves. The most important thing that I have learned was how social media is influencing children today. Students now have an intersection in their life of who they are and who they portray themselves to be. Students are constantly performing their lives for others to see on social media, and like Woolfolk discusses, it is challenging to see where the real me ends and the internet me begins. I find that this is important for me because there are not a lot of programs or resources for teachers in elementary schools to deal with social media. It is important for me to have discussions with my students about who they are and why they are special, and how seeing how someone else appears on the internet should not impact who you are and how you act. All of those things, who you are and how you act, are forming your identity. I can use this information to help my classroom because the greater understanding that I have of my students and their families and the way that they are raised, the greater my understanding will be of my children. Woolfolk discusses the importance of helping students with their emotional needs in Chapter 1. So the better that I can understand my students, their families, their lives, and ultimately their own personal identities, the more support I can provide them for their emotional needs, and thus the better teacher that I can be for them. My final thoughts on this topic are that identity is something that Woolfolk says is unique and that maintains to be the same even if you've had changes in your life. I think it's important for me to keep this in mind in working with young students because these students are building their identities now even in 4th grade. I tend to believe that identity is something that you get in high school and in college, which the book does discuss, but the students need the building blocks of who they are to be able to ultimately become who they are. So in 4th grade, even though they're not in high school, they're not in college, it's still important for my students to be able to begin grasping who they are and what they believe. The building blocks for who my students will become are being formed now with them in my 4th grade class. Thanks.